Hey guys, this is Candice Malcolm and we are live. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thanks for watching this live video. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and share this video and go over and like our page. TNC News is a great place to get independent and real journalism in Canada. So today I'm doing a video on the prevalence of fake news in our society, and this is going to be a weekly segment that I do every Friday here, so I hope you'll continue to tune in and watch that. I think it's important to point out incredibly biased journalism and news reports when we see them, because they are all over the place. And you hear so much from liberals, from the mainstream media, from the Trudeau government in Canada about the new rise of fake media and fake news and how it's supposedly spreading disinformation and hate across the internet. As most of us who've been paying attention to the news in Canada, the news in the US as well, this is prevalent basically across the Western world, is that the mainstream media itself is often the one that's pushing a fake news narrative. They're pushing their own narrative. It's based on their opinion. It's not news. It's not unbiased or straight news. It's always got a tint or a flavor of their own bias. And you could just tell from reading either a headline or two sentences into an article. So I'm going to keep track every single week. If you guys see a story that you want me to include in this segment, please feel free to forward it to me, email it to me, tweet at me, or post it on this Facebook or YouTube page in the comments, and we'll go through it. Because like I said, these fake reports are everywhere. They always have been. The media has always been biased. They've always leaned left. That's an open secret. And now all of a sudden, they are trying to, these major voices, these major mainstream liberal voices, are trying to accuse conservatives, people on the right, and just independent people who aren't part of the sort of mainstream media, mainstream liberal, segment of society, accusing those folks of promoting fake news and spreading their own false stories, and we know that's not true. So I'm going to quickly go through a couple stories here just to show how prevalent fake news and bias is in the mainstream media. So we're going to start today with this Toronto Star article from earlier this week. You can see the headline there. It says, Andrew Scheer's absence from Vancouver Pride Parade speaks volumes about upcoming election, analysts say. Now, this is my favorite thing that they do when they say analysts say. So this is not an opinion piece. This isn't a column. This isn't written by an opinion journalist. This is supposed to be passed off as straight news, unbiased, completely straight. But you see the use of the word analysts say there. So what they've done is they've taken a biased opinion that they have, and then they found some analyst. I mean, anyone can claim to be an analyst. An analyst is such a vague word. It's like the word expert. Experts and analysts are just words that media and elites like to use to describe themselves so that they give credibility to their own biased ideas. So here we go. Apparently, analysts are coming out and saying that Andrew Scheer's absence from the Vancouver Pride Parade is telling, and it's going to be a precursor for this election season. So you go on to read the story about how Pride is just the best thing in the world, and it's this inclusive, loving event where everyone comes together. And then, noting how all these major political leaders were there from Liberal, NDP, and Green. This is notably missing from the group was, and the smiley celebratory photos of political foes marching together was Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, who's declined to participate in any Pride parades this year. And then it goes on to say that's in stark contrast to two former leaders, Rona Ambrose and Joe Clark. So they went back in time, 20 years, to find two instances of Conservative leaders attending a Pride March. Now, there's plenty of reasons why someone wouldn't want to attend a Pride March. I mean, we live in a free society, so if you're not into that kind of thing, if you're not into the sort of public display of affection or hedonism or just sort of left-wing political advocacy that these Pride parades encompass, it's really just a left-wing show of all their favorite pet projects. So if you're on the right, and you're not really into that, either culturally or maybe because you have a family and you just don't want to go. You're busy that weekend, you're going somewhere else. My understanding is that Andrew Scheer was at a different parade for a different community, Caravana in Toronto, which is a big parade celebrating people from the Caribbean Isles. And so if you don't want to go to Pride, somehow it's because there's something wrong with you. Again, the underlying theme here is that you must be a bigot if you don't go to Pride. Now, they found a couple of political analysts, not just one, but several political analysts, who say this is because the Conservative Party has just moved too far to the right. Okay, if you continue to read on this brutal story, you go down a little lower and you really realize the heart of the issue, which is that the reason that the Conservatives chose not to attend this event in Vancouver is because Vancouver Pride has expelled various groups from the event. Now, this is common across Canada with Pride events that happen in Toronto, where they refuse to allow the Toronto police to participate in Pride. So Pride's supposed to be this open and inclusive event, unless you happen to be a member of a either conservative group or just a mainstream group in society, like the police, people who are in charge of keeping us safe. And then if you're part of that group, it's not overtly left-wing, then you're excluded. So Toronto Pride excluded the Toronto Police. Vancouver Pride banned both the University of British Columbia and the Vancouver Public Library. These are hardly conservative groups here. University of British Columbia, which is the most established university in Western Canada probably, and certainly not on the right. If anything, it's a left-leaning institution, and the Vancouver Public Library, which is just a mainstream institution. Now, the reason that Pride has banned these groups is because they had events where Pride said that the speakers were transphobic. So this is just pure attack on free speech. It's thought police. It's an Orwellian attempt by Vancouver Pride to say, if you don't follow our very rigid, far left ideological perspective, even if you have a speaker who might question it, like UBC and the Vancouver Public Library are not necessarily on the side of the speakers who might have critical views about trans people or LGBT issues. They just hosted events that didn't completely conform with the far left's vision. So they kicked these groups out. And then because of that, a lot of conservatives chose specifically to boycott Pride this year, specifically that Vancouver one. So, you know, the whole headline here about how Andrew Scheer's absence is because, you know, the party is going to far right and they're appealing to this like supposed mass of like bigoted Canadians who are anti-gay. Well, the reality is it was just because the Pride itself is so close-minded and so big in themselves that they don't want to include everybody. It's not an event for everybody. It's just an event for those who conform to the left-wing ideology. And I mean, like they buried that deep down in the story. The headline is completely biased. The whole premise here is just absolutely ridiculous. So shame on the Toronto Star. That's sort of what we've come to expect, though. The Toronto Star is overtly left-wing. They even say it. They even claim to be a progressive source of news. So, you know, if you are looking for straight, unbiased news, don't go to the Toronto Star. Now, similarly, the CBC kind of had a similar theme here. It wasn't as overtly biased, but, you know, political leaders celebrate inclusiveness, tolerance, love at Vancouver Pride. They also mentioned how conservatives like Andrew Scheer weren't there. Buried deep down in the story is the real reason these politicians didn't go to the Pride event, because of this crackdown on free speech and total intolerance for pretty mild institutions. Like to say that UBC and the Vancouver Public Library are somehow unwelcome in mainstream society or because they're intolerant is just absurd. It's truly absurd. So that's that. Now I want to move on to a second story here, which is an exclusive over at TNC News. So check this one out. This is, we had one of our reporters go through and look at the coverage on CBC. So CBC gets a huge mandate from the Canadian taxpayers. They get subsidized well over $1 billion a year. And the reason is that they're supposed to tell Canadian stories, tell stories about Canada and fill in that need. Supposedly we have a need in Canada to have more Canadian stories. But when you turn on CBC, as has been the case for the last 3 years, ever since Donald Trump was elected, you just see story after story after story about the US. Like if I wanted to turn on the news and see, you know, Trump derangement syndrome, like high spectrum, intense, anti-Trump, you know, you already have CNN, you already have MSNBC. So why are we paying the CBC through taxes to do the same thing? Well, this story over at TNC.news shows how even when, so there was a big manhunt in Canada. There was these two men from Port Alberni, British Columbia, who were wanted in a series of murders. They were missing. The police pinpointed them down to a specific area in Manitoba, and there was a huge manhunt. I mean, this is the biggest story of the year, the biggest story of the summer, certainly. Everyone in Canada was talking about it. Everyone wanted to know what the status was of this manhunt. And instead of focusing on the Canadian element, on Canadian news, the CBC devoted most of their attention on the Mueller hearings, on the Trump witch hunt, on the Russia conspiracy in the United States. So instead of actually covering news that's important to Canadians, they were all over the place talking about Robert Mueller and those hearings. So this was for the date of July 24th, 2019. CBC's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube posts for that date were all taken into consideration. According to the findings by TNC.news, the Canadian broadcaster dedicated 26% of its social media posts on the Mueller hearings, only 14% on that Canadian manhunt. Out of the 57 tweets, just under a quarter of the day's content was dedicated to that leading US story, and only 1/8 were about material about the Canada's search on the two fleeing murder suspects. So, you have to ask yourself, why is it that the CBC is focused so much on the American news and not focused on the Canadian news? If we look over at the YouTube page, there was 20 minutes of airtime about the manhunt compared to 6 hours of content on the Mueller hearings. 6 hours. So, I mean, just that puts it all in perspective. And there was 27 minutes about everything else in the day, all the rest of the news combined. So 27 minutes for everything else, 6 hours for the Mueller hearings, and about 20 minutes on the manhunt. Totally ridiculous. So that's what you can expect from the CBC. Nothing but total Trump hatred. And we're going to do one more story. This is sort of honorable mention. Over at the Post-Millennial, there was a story, this was just hilarious, that found that there was a report put out by a liberal think tank, like a big L arm of the Liberal Party, basically, that put out this research story to focus on the problem of fake news. This is kind of funny. So the think tank's called the Public Policy Forum. They put together what they call the Digital Democracy Project, which is a multi-year project to analyze and respond to increasing amounts of disinformation and hate in the digital sphere. So this is what I was talking about earlier. There's this whole fear-mongering about fake news being pushed out there. They want to find out who is spreading disinformation, who is spreading hate in the digital sphere. In their minds, they already have decided that it's going to be the right-wing conservative news sources, and anything that's not sort of the conformist center-left agenda in Canada. But funny, ironically, the findings of this report actually found that the more mainstream media news you consume, the more likely you are to get major questions about Canadian public policy wrong, the more likely basically you are to believe in conspiracy theories and fake news. So the one troubling point, this is from the report, the one troubling report seems to be that while social media exposure is associated with higher levels of misinformation, so is exposure to traditional or mainstream media. According to the report, those who get their news from the mainstream media outlets are more likely to give incorrect answers to questions about basic government policy issues. Survey respondents who read or watched more traditional news media were less likely to express uncertainty about public policy questions and more likely to give an incorrect response. So not only, if you watch the mainstream media, which they described as CBC Online, CTV, CTV Online, CBC Television, and TVA, the French channel, if you watch those 5 sources, you are more likely to be confident in your own understanding of the news, but also more likely to give the wrong answer. So that's like a double whammy, because it makes people more arrogant because they believe they are more informed than other people, but they actually are less informed. They're more likely to answer these questions wrong. So who is the biggest promoter of fake news? Well, there you have it. A liberal study found that it was actually the mainstream media. So I'm going to leave it at that for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're new, don't forget to check out tnc.news, like this page, like this channel, and go ahead and share this video. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.